The sun in Savo was a merciless furnace, its heat shimmering off the cracked earth in waves that distorted the horizon. Amani Kamani, a veteran wildlife conservationist whose skin was as weathered as the ancient baobabs, wrestled his aging Land Cruiser through the parched landscape. The vehicle groaned, protesting every dip and ridge, its engine ticking with a worrisome rhythm. Dust, fine as flour, coated everything, stinging his eyes and caking his throat. This was not the Savo he knew, teeming with life. This was a land under siege. Emaciated elephants, their ribs stark beneath wrinkled hides, trudged listlessly toward dry riverbeds. Gaunt buffalo, usually formidable, stood with heads bowed, their strength sapped by the relentless drought. The environmental crisis was not just a headline. It was the raw, agonizing reality he lived every day. And with the drought came another predator. Humans, driven by desperation or greed, laying illegal snare lines across the park. Tracking these barbaric traps was Amani's current grim mission. He was alone, a breach of every protocol. His usual partner, Quito, was down with a brutal fever, leaving Amani no choice but to venture into this dangerous sector solo. A dangerous decision, but the reports of increased snare activity had been too urgent to ignore. The silence of the vast savannah was broken only by the hum of his failing vehicle. But then a darker silence fell, the kind that portended death. Amani squinted, shading his eyes. High above, against the brutal blue, vultures circled, patient, ominous dots in the sky. His stomach clenched. Vultures meant something had fallen, or was about to. He cut the engine, plunging the world into a sudden, stifling quiet. The heat pressed in, heavy and suffocating. And then he heard it, a deep, pained, rumbling growl that vibrated through the earth, a sound of agony and immense power. It was close, too close. Ignoring the insistent voice of caution, Amani grabbed his binoculars and moved. He pushed through the thorny acacia thicket, the spikes tearing at his dusty uniform, his heart hammering against his ribs. What he found stopped him cold. In a small, sun-baked clearing, a magnificent male lion, Jabari, lay struggling. Blood matted his tawny mane, and his amber eyes, usually burning with fierce pride, now held a raw, primal terror. A barbaric wire snare, thick and cruelly taut, was cinched around his rear leg, digging deep into flesh and muscle. The lion thrashed weakly, exhausted, each movement a fresh agony. Jabari, a king brought low by a twisted piece of metal. Amani's training screamed at him, non-intervention. Observe, report, do not engage alone. Every fiber of his being screamed for retreat, for the safety of distance. But his heart wouldn't let him. This was not a natural death. This was human cruelty. He reached for his satellite phone, his fingers trembling as he tapped out a quick, desperate message about the snare and Jabari's dire condition. Before he could confirm the send, the screen flickered, then died. Battery depleted. He was utterly alone. Jabari wouldn't last the night. The thought was a searing brand. He had to try. This agonizing decision, a blatant defiance of park regulations and common sense, solidified in his gut. Amani swallowed hard, then began to gather his inadequate arsenal, the wire cutters from his toolbox, a small tranquilizer dart pen, far too weak for a full-grown lion, and a flimsy catchpole. As he prepared, Jabari's eyes, wide with pain and a strange, weary resignation, locked onto his. It wasn't the usual aggressive challenge. It was a gaze of profound, wordless connection, a silent plea that pierced Amani to his core. "I'm going to help you," Amani murmured, his voice hoarse, taking a hesitant step forward. "But you have to let me." The lion watched him, not with the expected snarl or lunge, but with an unprecedented calm that sent a shiver down Amani's spine. It was a resignation that went beyond instinct, almost an understanding. As Amani drew closer, his gaze fell upon the snare itself. This wasn't the crude makeshift wire of subsistence poachers. This was industrial grade, thick and braided, a professional, brutal instrument. This wasn't random. This pointed to something far more organized, far more determined, hinting at a darker network at play in the shadows of Savo. Amani took a deep, shuddering breath, the dust of the clearing thick in his lungs. Every instinct, honed by years in the bush, screamed at him to retreat, to maintain distance from the apex predator. Yet, He moved forward slowly, deliberately, towards the gravely injured Jabari. His hands, usually steady, trembled as he gripped the flimsy catchpole and the small tranquilizer pen. What happened next defied all logic, all scientific understanding of animal behavior. Jabari, the king of beasts, did not snarl, he did not lunge. As Amani drew within striking distance, the mighty lion simply lowered his massive head, his amber eyes still fixed on Amani, a silent acknowledgement of the human's intent. It was like he understood. Amani would later recount, the memory still chilling him. A silent agreement between us, impossible as it sounds. With a surge of adrenaline, Amani seized the moment. He slipped the loop of the catchpole over Jabari's head, anchoring the other end deep into the sun-baked ground, careful not to tighten it too much. The lion tolerated the intrusion, merely shifting his weight. Then, with a prayer on his lips, Amani plunged the small tranquilizer pin into Jabari's flank. "This won't do much, big fella," he murmured, his voice raw, "but maybe it'll take the edge off." It was a token gesture, a tiny dose meant for smaller animals, but it was all he had. The real work began. The industrial-grade snare was not just wrapped, it was embedded deep into the swollen flesh of Jabari's rear leg, an ugly, jagged wound already oozing with infection. Amani worked meticulously, the wire cutter straining against the thick, braided steel. Each snip was a grunt of effort, each movement agonizingly slow. The air grew heavy with the scent of blood and sweat. Jabari flinched with each tug and cut, a low rumble vibrating in his chest, but he made no aggressive move. His remarkable tolerance defied explanation, a silent testament to an understanding Amani couldn't comprehend. The setting sun cast long, dramatic shadows across the clearing, painting the scene in hues of orange and deepening blue as Amani toiled. Finally, with a loud snap, the last strand of wire gave way. Tension visibly drained from Jabari's massive body, a deep sigh escaping him. The relief in the clearing was palpable. Amani didn't waste a second. He began the meticulous, gut-wrenching task of cleaning the wound, removing bits of torn flesh and dirt. He applied antiseptic generously, then followed with a thick layer of antibiotic ointment, his fingers sticky with the lion's blood. It was a crude field dressing, but it was all he could do. As he finished, Jabari's head lifted slightly, his amber eyes, now less clouded with pain, meeting Amani's. It was a gaze of profound awareness, an almost human understanding. Amani, feeling a surge of something akin to empathy, retrieved a collapsible bowl from his pack and offered water. Jabari lowered his head and drank weakly, lapping at the precious liquid, his exhaustion evident. Darkness had fully descended now, painting the Tsavo night in an inky blackness broken only by the distant sparkle of stars. A new dilemma presented itself. Leaving Jabari alone in his weakened state would be cruel, a death sentence. Yet staying nearby in the open violated every protocol, every rule of self-preservation. Another protocol was about to be broken. Amani made his decision. He would sleep in his land cruiser, a silent sentinel, keeping watch over the wounded king. As Amani moved back towards his vehicle, Jabari stirred. A soft sound escaped the lion's throat, a gentle, non-threatening chuff. It was a social communication, a greeting usually reserved for members of a pride, never heard before directed at a human. It wasn't a growl, Amani would insist, a tremor in his voice, but a sound of connection. It solidified the inexplicable bond, a bridge built on a shared moment of agony and unlikely trust. Amani settled into the cramped confines of his land cruiser, but sleep wouldn't come easily. The sophistication of the snare haunted him. This wasn't the work of desperate, opportunistic poachers. This was a professional job, a well-resourced operation. It hinted at a far darker, more organized threat lurking in the shadows of Tsavo, a conspiracy that stretched beyond the simple act of poaching. As the first faint streaks of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, Amani finally drifted into a fitful sleep. He awoke with a jolt, the early light filtering through his window, to find Jabari, with immense effort, had dragged himself closer to the vehicle, seeking the proximity of his unlikely savior. The roar of a distant engine signaled their arrival. Amani watched, a mix of relief and trepidation in his chest, as a well-equipped land cruiser, emblazoned with the park's veterinary insignia, pulled into the clearing. Dr. Nia Kimathi, renowned for her sharp intellect and no-nonsense approach, emerged, her keen eyes immediately locking onto Jabari, then to Amani, still beside the lion. Behind her, a team of rangers carried proper medical kits and tranquilizer guns, their expressions a mix of grim determination and professional skepticism. Dr. Kimathi, a whirlwind of efficiency, wasted no time. Her gaze was severe as she took in the crude bandaging and the proximity between man and beast. "You treated him without proper sedation, Amani?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the morning stillness, a blend of disbelief and controlled anger. "Do you have any idea the risk you took?" Amani met her gaze, his own resolve unwavering. "He wouldn't have survived the night, Naya. There was no choice." He recounted the previous evening's impossible events, the dying phone, Jabari's inexplicable cooperation, the silent agreement. Her skepticism was palpable. The story flew in the face of everything they knew about lions. But as she approached Jabari, dart gun ready, she paused. The lion, though more alert in the morning light, was clearly still weak, his eyes dull with exhaustion. Dr. Kimathi assessed him carefully. "He's too weak," she murmured, a frown creasing her brow. "Darting him now, even with a reduced dose, could send him into shock. It could kill him." Against all expectations, a risky decision was made. They would attempt a hands-on treatment. Slowly, cautiously, the team approached Jabari. To their astonishment, the great lion remained incredibly calm. He shifted slightly, a low rumble in his chest that wasn't a growl of aggression but a sound of discomfort, yet he didn't attempt to flee or attack. "I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Kimathi whispered, her initial disbelief giving way to professional awe. "This isn't normal lion behavior, Amani, not for a fully wild male." With meticulous care, the team set up an IV drip, administering fluids, powerful antibiotics, and pain medication. Jabari tolerated it all, occasionally flinching but otherwise remaining remarkably cooperative. Throughout the entire process, whenever Amani spoke to him or simply rested a reassuring hand on his flank, Jabari would respond with a soft, distinct chuffing sound. It was the same social communication Amani had heard last night, a deep, resonant rumble that indicated friendliness and connection. "That's a pro-social communication," Dr. Kimathi observed, her scientific curiosity piqued. "Typically reserved for familiar Pride members, it's truly extraordinary." She confirmed what Amani already suspected. "He matches our records from trail cams. No tags, no prior human contact. He's a fully wild, untagged male." The mystery deepened. Jabari's behavior challenged every existing understanding of lion cognition and habituation. This wasn't just unusual, it was a new paradigm. Realizing they were witnessing something profound, Dr. Kimathi decided. "We're setting up a temporary research camp here," she announced, her voice firm. "We need to document his recovery and, more importantly, his behavior." She watched as Jabari, though wary of the other rangers, softened completely whenever Amani came near. It was a selective bond, undeniable and powerful. Dr. Kimathi, ever the scientist, attempted to rationalize it. Perhaps some form of imprinting, she hypothesized, though her tone was reluctant. But that shouldn't be possible with a mature wild male, especially not in a situation like this. As the team began to set up, Amani's mind drifted back to the snare, the industrial-grade wire, the expert placement. This was no desperate hunter, but a professional, part of a sophisticated operation. The drought, making animals vulnerable, was merely a convenient cover for what felt like a far larger, darker purpose. An organized poaching epidemic, perhaps even something more insidious, a corporate cover-up of illegal activities facilitated by the very desperation of the drought, now reaching into the heart of Tsavo's protected wildlife. Jabari's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. Within days, the severe swelling in his leg subsided, and the raw wound began to heal with astonishing speed, leaving the veterinary team, including Dr. Kimathi, baffled. His robust prime health and, remarkably, his almost serene cooperation with Amani seemed to be key factors. The initial skepticism from the park administration had melted away, replaced by avid support for the groundbreaking research now centered around the miracle lion, as the team affectionately dubbed him. Dr. Kimathi, seizing the opportunity, established a formal study. Every interaction, every nuance of Jabari's behavior was meticulously documented. Amani, whose rotation should have taken him to another sector, found himself postponing indefinitely. Jabari's specific tolerance for him, the gentle chuffing sounds, the way he would present his massive head or neck to Amani, a clear invitation for social grooming, all cemented their deepening, inexplicable bond. It became clear that Amani was central to Jabari's calm demeanor. The debate over Jabari's eventual release became a central, contentious issue. He's ready physically, Dr. Kamathi acknowledged during a late-night discussion, but this level of human habituation, it's unprecedented. How will he fare in the wild? The risk of him approaching other humans or losing his fear was a real concern, flying in the face of all traditional conservation ethics. The decision was, in the end, taken out of their hands. On the morning of the 17th day, Amani approached the enclosure to find it empty. Jabari had self-released, effortlessly scaling the fence designed to keep him in. He hadn't fled in a panic, but had moved purposefully, heading towards what Amani knew was his old territory. The team tracked him by vehicle, Amani's heart a mix of pride and apprehension. They observed him, hidden at a safe distance, as Jabari encountered the scent markers of an encroaching male. With a powerful guttural roar that vibrated through the savannah, he scraped the ground, spraying urine, asserting his dominance. His fundamental lion nature remained intact. He hunted successfully, his movements fluid and powerful, a king reclaiming his rightful place. Yet, a shadow began to fall over Amani's relief. Even after the high-profile rescue, even with Jabari back in the wild, reports of similar industrial-grade snares continued to filter in from other sectors of the park. It wasn't an isolated incident, it was a persistent, systematic problem. This wasn't just the desperate act of a lone poacher, it pointed to an unseen network, a covert operation, perhaps a larger, more sinister scheme at play in Tsavo. The scientific debate within the research team reflected this unease. Dr. Zola Mbeki, a visiting neuroscientist, challenged Dr. Kamathi's imprinting theory, arguing for a deeper, more complex neurological explanation for Jabari's bond with Amani. But for Amani, the scientific explanations, or lack thereof, were less pressing than the unspoken question that gnawed at him. How were these highly sophisticated industrial-grade snares appearing in such numbers? And who truly benefited from this widespread, increasingly bold poaching? A profound unease settled in Amani's gut. Jabari's initial ensnarement, he realized with growing certainty, was not just an accident. It was part of a pattern, a symptom of a larger, ongoing conservation crisis with hidden depths. A crisis orchestrated by unseen hands, a dark conspiracy slowly revealing itself beneath the relentless Kenyan sun. If you've been gripped by Amani's impossible bond with Jabari, you won't believe where this story goes next. The heartwarming turns into something far more chilling, revealing a conspiracy that puts not just wildlife, but Amani himself in immediate life-threatening danger. So hit that like button, share this video with everyone you know, and subscribe to unravel the dark truth with us. Amani's extended field assignment in Tsavo was finally drawing to a close. His rotation back to park headquarters was imminent, a bittersweet return that meant leaving Jabari behind. But before he left, Amani knew he had to see him one last time. He drove his Land Cruiser, a silent specter in the fading afternoon light, to a remote observation point where Jabari had recently been tracked. It was a final, solitary, and deeply personal pilgrimage. He cut the engine and waited. The vast savannah stretched out before him, bathed in the rich, golden hues of sunset. Amani scanned the horizon, his heart thrumming with anticipation and a familiar ache. And then, a shadow detached itself from the dense acacia line. Jabari. He appeared not with the cautious stealth of a hunter, but with a direct, purposeful movement, testing the air, his gaze fixed on Amani's vehicle. The magnificent lion, now fully recovered, muscular, and radiating raw power, stopped approximately 30 yards from the Land Cruiser. He sat, majestic and still, looking directly at Amani. There was no aggression, no fear, only that profound, knowing gaze. Then Jabari made the sound. That familiar, soft, resonant chuffing sound, unmistakable in its social intent, a greeting, a recognition across species. Inside the vehicle, Amani felt an intense internal struggle. Protocol screamed at him to stay put, to maintain the safe, respectful distance that defined the boundary between man and wild. But in that moment, Protocol seemed suddenly inadequate, a flimsy barrier against the conviction swelling in his chest. This was a unique, unprecedented bond, a phenomenon that defied explanation. To remain safely behind glass felt like a betrayal of that connection. Amani made the agonizing decision. With a slow, deliberate movement that felt like the height of risk, he opened the door and stepped out. The air around him shimmered with tension, the silence thick with the weight of his choice. He stood beside his vehicle, roughly 20 yards from Jabari. Man and lion regarded each other in profound silence, a shared moment of cross-species recognition that transcended language, science, and instinct. Jabari briefly lowered his massive head, then met Amani's eyes once more, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Then, without a sound, he rose, turned, and walked back into the fading light of his territory, melting into the shadows as gracefully as he had appeared. Amani stood there long after Jabari was gone, the unprecedented connection burning within him. The scientific implications were staggering, the emotional impact indelible. Yet, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery streaks, his mind drifted to another darker truth. The problem of the snares, the sheer volume of them, the industrial quality, the systematic way they appeared across the park, it suggested something far more insidious than desperate individual acts. This was a well-organized poaching epidemic. The park's inability to fully eradicate these traps, despite their efforts, hinted at a systemic failure, perhaps even a corporate cover-up or covert operations benefiting from the illicit trade. A chilling realization settled over Amani. Jabari was just one victim, a single king caught in a much larger, darker game. The true human-related danger wasn't just the traps, but the shadowy forces that enabled their proliferation, the unseen hands that orchestrated this devastation. The struggle for conservation, Amani knew now, was against an invisible enemy, well-funded and deeply entrenched, pulling strings from the shadows, a broader conspiracy slowly, terrifyingly coming into focus. Years unfurled across the vast canvas of Savo, and Jabari, the lion once ensnared, now reigned. He thrived, a powerful patriarch siring robust cubs, defending his territory with the fierce majesty of a king. His leg, though bearing a faint scar and a slight hitch in his gait, carried him through the savannah with unwavering strength. Dr. Kamathi's research, meticulously documenting Jabari's unique cognitive capabilities, and his unprecedented bond with Amani, began to reshape scientific understanding of lion intelligence. Her papers, initially met with skepticism, slowly gained traction, challenging long-held beliefs about animal cognition in fully wild populations. The story, captured in the documentary The Lion's Trust, became a global sensation, stirring hearts and boosting anti-poaching efforts worldwide. Yet, Jabari remained a persistent anomaly. He continued to exhibit a selective non-aggression towards humans, particularly Amani, a phenomenon that continued to baffle scientists. Amani, now grizzled and wiser, often found himself observing Jabari from a distance, the weight of their shared history a palpable presence. He reflected on the initial snare, the barbaric device that had nearly claimed Jabari's life. What had once seemed like an isolated act of human cruelty now resonated as a symptom of a much larger, more insidious poaching epidemic. The consistent quality and prevalence of the industrial-grade snares appearing across Savo suggested organized networks, not individual desperation. It pointed to a possible corporate cover-up, powerful interests quietly backing these illicit activities, exploiting the drought-weakened ecosystem for their own gain. Amani realized that the true challenge of conservation wasn't merely about individual animal rescues. It was about fighting covert operations and systemic corruption that stretched far beyond the savannah. Disturbingly, subsequent field reports began to uncover other forms of human-related danger beyond snares. Subtle pollution patterns, strange biomarkers near remote water sources hinted at other illicit activities that threatened wildlife and destabilized the delicate balance of the ecosystem. These incidents, often classified and quietly suppressed, painted a grim picture of a wilderness under siege from unseen forces. Amani's true confrontation wasn't a physical battle. It was the shocking, chilling realization of the broad, hidden human forces at play, the invisible enemy that continued to exploit and endanger Tsavo. The source of these pervasive activities remained elusive, a classified incident that continued to destabilize the ecosystem, a constant, low-burning threat. Jabari became a living symbol. He was a testament to humanity's capacity for both profound cruelty and unwavering compassion, but he was also a stark, powerful reminder of the hidden battles, the silent war Amani and his fellow conservationists waged against these unseen enemies. Scientists continued to debate gratitude versus conditioned response in Jabari's behavior, but Amani knew it was something far more profound, a unique, unreplicable bridge between human and wild, a moment of mutual awareness that defied all scientific labels. The ultimate mystery wasn't just the lion's intelligence or the depth of his connection with Amani. It was the dark secrets humans buried, the corporate greed and covert operations that jeopardized the very world they claimed to protect, and the lengths to which they would go to keep those truths hidden. Jabari's legacy was not just his survival, but the chilling realization that the wilderness was fighting for its life against an enemy far more cunning and dangerous than any predator, an enemy woven into the fabric of human ambition. Jabari's story became a legend, a living testament to an inexplicable connection between man and beast that forever changed the scientific understanding of wild lion cognition. But for Amani, the lion's miraculous survival was a stark, constant reminder of a far darker truth. The industrial snares, the escalating poaching epidemic, the subtle signs of pollution, these were not isolated incidents. They were threads in a vast, insidious web spun by unseen forces. Amani, now a figure of quiet determination, knew the true enemy wasn't the poacher on the ground, but the shadowy corporate interests and covert operations that fueled them. The fight for Tsavo, for all wild places, was a silent war against an invisible, deeply entrenched adversary. Jabari, the king who once lay dying, now thrived, a symbol of hope, yet also a stark living scar of the devastating human-related dangers lurking beneath the surface. The greatest mystery was not the lion's gratitude, but the depths of humanity's greed, jeopardizing the very world Amani vowed to protect. The battle continued against an enemy whose face remained hidden, but whose destructive presence was undeniable.